Welcome to this video about universal design principles. I'm Lasse Petersen and I'm the COO of KnowMore. In this video I'm going to talk about colors, placement, and then we go through 5 examples so you can see how those two play together. Colors of hue are the basic building blocks of color. On one hand we have yellow and blue, and on the other hand we have green and red. Both of these sets of colors have the maximum amount of contrast between them. Chromaticity refers to how closely the color we're looking at is to its pure hue. If we're looking at a color where only a little bit of white, black or gray has been mixed into it, it means that it has a high chromatic number and it's close to its pure hue. Saturation refers to the degree to which the color changes appearance under different lightings. So a color might look different in the evening or when there are a lot of lights during the day. A color's value describes how light or dark the color is in comparison to white. That means that yellow has a higher value than blue because yellow is much closer to white than blue is. Adding white to a pure color will tint the color. That means it will make it lighter. Meanwhile, adding black to a pure hue will make it appear darker, thereby adding more shadow to the color. Choosing a limited number of colors and then adding light to them is the standard way of designing PowerPoint presentations in Scandinavia. Here are 2 high contrast examples, one red and one blue. On the right side we have 2 low contrast examples, one green and one brown. Using tinted colors like these are the Scandinavian way of designing PowerPoint presentations. Only if you want to highlight a particular and often smaller element are high contrast colors used. In this example we can see how large contrast has been applied between the left and the right side of the slide. This contrast brings a lot of attention to the tree, which are centered in the middle of the picture. This practice is normally not advised, but in this case it works out pretty well because the tree is the most important element in the picture. In this next slide we see something that are much closer to a Scandinavian look for a presentation. We have some tinted colors, so we have the blue color which is tinted in different directions and also a lot of shade, but it doesn't steal attention away from the key message. In this next slide we can see how shading an area will actually make it much easier to apply text to the area, because now the contrasts are actually much higher between the white and the shaded area. Text is almost always more important than pictures and other elements. If the applied contrast is too high in comparison to non-text elements, then it will take up too much attention from the texted areas. Here I want to talk about the difference between complementary color and analogous colors. Complementary colors are 2 colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel, while analogous colors are 3 colors which are next to each other, where one color dominates, one supports, and one is accent. Complementary colors are used when you want to highlight an element by applying maximum contrast. Analogous colors are used when you want to match colors nicely together by creating a comfortable design which are pleasant to look at. But be careful when applying contrast in large volumes. It can appear overwhelming and take up too much focus from other elements on the slide. Here we can see how different tints of green has been applied so the overall color scheme matches well together. You can also see in the upper right corner how the blue has been tinted differently, thus to provide a nice smooth element. We consider this to be a very nice looking Scandinavian design on this slide. It's very common to have colored boxes in presentations with text in them. You can see how the boxes at the left, there are very little contrast and it gets really hard to read the text. On the right side you can see some examples where it will show how black and white text has been applied to colored boxes. This works much better because the contrast now are much higher and the text are much clearer. The last point about text boxes and colors are that boxes should not have borders around them. If you have a border around the box, then it creates too much attention to the actual content of the box. If you want to design a presentation in the Scandinavian look, it's much better to keep boxes clean with white or black text and with no boxes surrounding them. It's how almost all companies prefer them, so if nothing else is specified, this is how they should look. In this example we can see some more unfortunate combinations of box and text colors. The yellow text on the red box are very irritating for the eye, while the purple text on the orange and red boxes does not have enough high contrast in order to make it work. These examples are definitely not in line with a Nordic design principle. Let's talk about spacing of elements. This topic is extremely important. So white space refers to all empty areas on a slide, and this is commonly seen between the header and the content, or between the group of elements on the slide. It can also be between related objects on a slide, or it can be around a specific element on a slide. So white space is applied to make your presentation more visually appealing to your audience. And that's because by applying white space, you avoid having this clustered look where all of your elements are kind of on top of each other. It also really reduces the complexity of the slide, and it makes it much more easier to understand what's actually going on. When you build a slide or you improve on an existing slide, you should always start by separating elements so they have a margin between them and they look pleasant to look at. But if you still think that your slide looks cluttered, then consider removing pictures or unnecessary clip art if they're not relevant for the storyline that you're trying to convey. So this slide is just an example of poorly used white space. You see, all of the elements are cluttered and they're almost touching each other. And you can also see that the heading are not really separated from the main content. And though even a lot of the other guidelines are fulfilled, it just looks wrong. It's a really bad slide. On this slide you can see how we have fixed some of these problems. The slide is much nicer to look at because the elements are separated from each other. It looks more pleasant for the eyes and the elements are not cluttered in that way. When you use white space appropriately on a slide, it's also much easier to get a good sense of which elements are related to other elements and in what order they relate. Let's go to some examples where the client demands that his slide is visual enhanced. On a side note, this is also one of the archetype PowerPoint assignments on the KnowMore platform. And only if the client explicitly asks for visual enhancements should we make such a large change to the client input. The client have asked us to find an appropriate background picture and also play around with the text elements in order to design a more visually appealing slide. So we found this nice picture here with the railroad tracks, which has a beautiful spread of colors. You can also see the shoe in the middle with the black and white for maximum contrast with the white laces. It's very good. These laces really bring attention to the shoe and to the design in general. However, the text in the top corner does not really work out that well. They're not that much contrast, so the white texts are not really applicable here. Well, on this next slide we can see how we have applied a shade to the background picture. So it actually is much easier to use a white text. And then we remove the text in the lower left corner and we made it a little bit larger. And now the slide is very good. Let's look at another example of visual enhancements. So here the client wants us to find a picture and use the current text to highlight a few key points. Here's an example of how this slide could be improved. It's still a bit messy and a bit too complicated. And also the spacing are a bit off, both in relation to the header but also inside of the box element. In this slide we have tried to fix some of these issues. The overall design is much cleaner and the spacing has been fixed with regards to the header and inside the box. And also we have copied the color from the background picture and applied it to the text. If a conflict should occur between keeping the design to as few colors as possible or making the text more readable, then it's always readability that wins. Of course, applying this color to the text is very much against what we have talked about previously. However, in this setting we feel that we can steal it off the slide and it will actually work pretty well with the rest of the slide. Another reason why in this case we can steal another color is because the picture is applied to the whole slide. It changes the situation quite substantially. Here's another example of a slide that obviously needs some visual enhancements. This slide is a little bit better, but it's not that good. So the contrast in the header are bad, and it's really hard to read the text on the right. Also the colors on the graph does not really play well with the other elements on the slide. Here's a much nicer approach to handling the visual enhancements of this slide. See, all the histogram colors have been taken from the picture, so it fits very nice together. There's also the shade element which has been added, so the text in white can now be read against the strong contrasts. Also the histogram is much simpler and cleaner than the old graph, so everything is really nice, and also all of the elements has been aligned perfectly. This is an example of a very good slide. In this example I will show you how visual enhancement can actually be thought of as a creative process rather than something you just built on the first go. So the first slide here is nice, but you can also see that the background picture draws too much attention in comparison to what's actually important, which are the foreground elements. It's always important that the background picture does not steal away the attention, but merely supports the message of the other elements in the slide. In this slide, the background element has been hit with a center gradient, so it appears much lighter in the middle, and the foreground element has been applied with a bluish color. Thus they are standing much more out now in comparison to the background. On this slide it's a bit better, but because the elements are so far apart, the background still draws a lot of attention. So now the important elements are really coming in front, and that's good. However, now it's like the opposite problem. Now the background picture is really small and you can't really see what it is, and you kind of have to look at it for a while before you actually notice that it's a building. So here on the last attempt we have actually combined the best of two worlds. We have kept the shaded background to make the heading stand out perfectly. You can still see what the background is, but it doesn't take too much attention, and you have the clear message in the middle. So I like how this picture actually turned out. I think this is a very good slide. Let's look at a final example of visual enhancements, which are a topic of pros and cons of eating blueberries. The first slide actually didn't turn out that bad. However, the header cannot really be read, so let's change that. So simply by adding a little bit of shade, now we can read the header, and that's perfect. But let's see if we can do better. This is actually a really good slide. It works really good when the picture is in the whole background and not just in the top element. I'm really happy about this slide, but I think we can make a minor adjustment to make it even more spot on. In terms of providing a clean Scandinavian design, I think this last example is spot on. The font size has been reduced and the spacing are much better. I really like this slide. This video is of course not the whole range of topics of design. So I really encourage you to go out there and seek out information for yourself. There are a lot of excellent training material out there that you can take advantage of. So that was it for this video. Enjoy your future projects.